In this video, we'll learn about the Pythagorean Theorem. So here's what the Pythagorean Theorem tells us. If you have a right triangle, like we see right here, the square of the hypotenuse, so the hypotenuse is that longest side here. So if I take that leg of the hypotenuse and I make a square of it, it's going to be equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So if I took the area of A and the area of B, that would be equal to the area of C. And that's what this figure here is trying to show you, right? This is the Pythagorean theorem here. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Triangles and right triangles in particular have all sorts of interesting characteristics and properties that you'll learn a lot more about in geometry. But here's one that we're going to talk about today. So let's take a look at this problem here. Dorothy climbs a 25-meter tower to ride a straight water slide. So she goes down this slide here. After landing in the pool, she walks 10 meters back to the base of the tower. What's the length of the slide to the nearest tenth? Well, I see here I have a right triangle, so I could use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out the length of that missing side. So A and B are always my legs. They're the parts that form the right angle. So 25 squared plus 10 squared equals C squared. Well, 25 squared, what is 25 times 25? If I take my calculator, I could just figure out, hey, 25 times 25, oh, that's 625. So 625 plus 100 is equal to C squared. So 725 equals C squared. Now, I want to know what C is. I don't want to know what C squared is. So the question is, how can I undo C squared? If you think, well, the opposite of squaring C is to take the square root. Remember we did this recently with simplifying the radical, right? If I could take the square root of both sides, then I could find out what C is. The square root of C squared is just C. And the square root of 725, I don't know that, but I am going to use my calculator to help me figure it out. And according to the directions, I want to round it to the nearest tenth. So I get 26.9258240,357 rounded to the nearest tenth. That's 26.9, and in this case, it's meters. And you always want to check to make sure this makes sense. The hypotenuse has to be the longest side, and 26.9 is longer than the other two sides. All right, let's take a look at this one. I want to find the missing side, and again, round it to the nearest tenth. Now, be careful with the information you're given. I have the hypotenuse. This is my C. I have a leg. This is A or B. I'm just going to call it A for the sake of this problem. So, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I see I have a right triangle. I'm missing a side, so I use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared, 25 squared, plus B squared. I don't know what B is, so I'm going to leave that here as my variable, equals 38 squared. Now I know from the previous problem, 25 squared is 625 plus B squared. I have no idea what 38 squared is, so I'm going to use my calculator and do 38 times 38. Oh, it's 1444. So now I have an equation I want to solve. I want to get the variable by itself. What should I do to get the variable by itself? Well, this is similar to problems that we've been working on. I'm going to zero out the constant that's on the variable side. So 1444 minus 625. Well, it's 9 there. 3 minus 2 is 1. And 14 minus 6 is 8. So I get 819 is equal to B squared. Let's take the square root of both sides because I want to find out what B is. The square root of B squared is just B. And again, I need to use my calculator to figure out what is the square root of 819. 28.6 if I round that to the nearest tenth. So this is going to be 28.6 yards. Okay, here's one for you to do on your own. Remember, identify what are the legs and what's the hypotenuse, and draw a picture. See if that will help you. So, bottom of a ladder is placed 4 feet from the side of a building. So here's my beautiful building here that I'm going to draw. That's very nice. All right, my ladder is 4 feet away from the side of the building. And it must reach a height of 13 feet. So it must go 13 feet in the air. And I want to know what's the length of this ladder rounded to the nearest hole. Well, I see here I've got a right triangle. I'm missing one of the side lengths, so I think about the Pythagorean Theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. A and b are my legs, that 4 feet and that 13 feet. So 4 squared plus 13 squared equals c squared. 14 squared is 16. There's my nice dog. 13 squared is 169. And that is equal to c squared. 16 plus 169, that is 185, is equal to c squared. But to find out what c is, I need to take the square root of both sides. And again, I sure don't know what the square root of 185 is. So I'm going to use the calculator and find the square root of 185. And I see it's 13.6. And if I round that to the nearest whole, that's going to be approximately 14 feet. So D was the correct choice. And that's how we use the Pythagorean theorem to help us solve problems.